Hello everyone, I'm Mick Massey. I've been a London Natural History Society member for just over 20 years, and most of that time I've been involved with the Ecology and Entomology Committee, where I was in the chair for 10 years. Thanks to Liz Andrew, who asked me to put this talk together as part of the Hampstead Heath Survey. I'm going to talk about two areas of London that I know a little bit about: Hampstead Heath and Hounslow Heath. I work as a conservation volunteer at Hounslow Heath and have done for more than 10 years now. So Hampstead Heath and Hounslow Heath are actually very different, and I want to talk about why they're different and what those differences, how those differences show up. Hampstead Heath's popular and has been well studied over the years by London Natural History Society, so it is well known to the general public, whereas Hounslow Heath is much more niche, shall we say, in that it's much less visited, but I think it's a hidden gem. I'm going to be doing mainly a photographic tour using mainly my photographs that have been taken over the last 20 years. So when I was researching this talk, I came across this newsletter of the Ecology and Entomology section from April 1990, and so about 30 years ago. And you see that this was a presentation on the geology and natural history of Hampstead Heath by Ray Softly. And in those days, we used to have our lectures at the grand surroundings of Burlington House in Piccadilly. And that is where we used to have the meetings when I started being an LNHS member about 10 years after this. So we're going to be looking at the landscape. This photograph was taken in 2019 when we did a geotrail, a geology field trip jointly with the London Geodiversity Partnership. And this is the view from the gazebo, or the base of the gazebo, at the top of Cohen's Field. We just done another geotrail with the London Geodiversity Partnership a few weeks ago in Bedford's Park in East London. And we've been doing these joint meetings for the last several years. And we'll be doing another one next year, so look out for it. So I'm going to be talking about the topic shown at the bottom there: the geography, the geology, some little bit of history, talk about some of the key habitats and the flora and fauna, and then touch on a little bit about conservation. End of introduction. So moving on to a map of Hampstead Heath. What can we see here? Well, we can see a lot of contours. Hampstead Heath up on the Spaniards Road here is the highest point in inner London at about 134 meters. We've got lots of contours, lots of hills. We've got two lines of ponds, two large lines of ponds, the Highgate Ponds and the Hampstead Ponds. And we see some woodland, we see some roads, we see lots of public footpaths running through. And this makes up a total area of the heath itself of about 300 hectares, but a lot of that is taken up with 54 hectares of ponds, 72 hectares of amenity grassland, and sections of woodland, some of which are sites of special scientific interest, triple SIs, and acid grasslands. So we're going to look at why these features are the way they are. In fact, the heath is made up of less than 1 hectare of what can be classed as true heathland. So let's have a quick look at the map of Hounslow Heath, and you see here there are virtually no contours. It's entirely flat, and we'll look at why that is the case. Very few paths and public footpaths. That relates to the history of the heath. And the actual nature reserve is 82 hectares, and that's this area here. And that is made up of woodland, acid grassland, and heathland. And much of the heathland had been destroyed over years, but quite a large proportion has been recreated, and now it's about 8 hectares of what we would call true heathland, and over 20 hectares of acid grassland as well. So the other point about the heath is that it's highly connected, opposed to Hampstead Heath, which is virtually cut off by roads and urban development around it. The Hounslow Heath is connected via the Crane Valley to a whole series of nature reserves running up and down, all the way down to the Thames. So we'll look at this more a little later. So we'll go back to Hampstead Heath and we go up to the highest point. And as you see here, we've got gorse on the top, and we've got pines, and there's actually a little bit of heather heath land just over the top of this gorse as well. So the highest point in inner London, and we'll see why we've got these plants growing here in a moment. So I'm going to use quite a few illustrations from this book. The second edition has just been released. It's called The Geology of London, and it's done as a Geologists Association guide. And included in this book, compiled by Diana Clements of the London Geodiversity Partnership, is a whole series of geotrails across London explaining the geology of London. Highly recommended to get this book, get the second edition. It really gives great excursions that can be done at any time of the year. So from that book, we get this illustration, and this is actually the geotrail you can see starting at Whitestone Pond, point number 1, and ending up in the Vale of Heath. And this shows a simplified version of the geology of the heath, which tells us so much about why the features are as they are and where the vegetation is what it is. So we'll go through the simplified geology here. All of the geology on the heath is sedimentary. It's been laid down either on the bottom of a sea or by the action of rivers or ice, as we'll see later. And the bottom of the pyramid, if you like, is London clay, this pale grey London clay. And that was laid down about 55 million years ago in a deep sea marine environment. We'll talk about the makeup of the rocks as we go through. And the top of the London clay is made up of this slightly darker purple color. And these are the claygate beds, which were created in a similar condition to clay, but as the marine conditions were getting gradually shallower. And then on top of the claygate beds, at about 50 million years old, are the bagshot sands shown in yellow here. And the bagshot sand was laid down in a very shallow marine environment. So the bagshot sands are highly permeable, as we'll see in a moment, and don't retain rainwater, and that flows out and is gathered in these lines of springs and ponds that we'll be talking about as we go through. So right on top of Spaniards Road, there are two little islands of Stanmore gravel. This was laid down much more recently. There was a 40 million year gap between the bagshot sand and the Stanmore gravel being laid down. And the origin of the Stanmore gravel is roughly in the order of 2 million years ago, so much more recent. And we'll be talking about that a little bit later. Now, the big event that happened after the Stanmore gravel was laid down about 450,000 years ago was the Anglian glaciation. And this was the biggest glaciation when the ice sheet came down to touch North London. And that resulted in the River Thames, which used to flow north of Hampstead and Highgate, being diverted to run south on its current path. So we go to the top of Sandy Heath in the Bagshot Sands, and we see this old photograph taken in 1867. And at that stage, the heath was not publicly owned, and the Sandy Heath was highly exploited for the digging of sand, and that continued for quite a long period of time. You see two trees on the horizon here. We'll be coming back to those, so just fix your eye on those for a moment. So here we are up on Sandy Heath, and this promontory here is an exposure of bagshot sand. And you'll see, as we go through some photographs of Sandy Heath, there are a series of ponds. And as I told you before, the bagshot sand is normally highly permeable, but we do get a series of ponds up on the top. And we'll see the reason for that in a moment. So here is another one of the ponds, and here we've got bog bean growing. Bog bean doesn't require acid conditions, but here it is growing on the top. And the reason for that is that these ponds are effectively lined with iron pan, and that is iron minerals combined with the sand to create an impermeable layer, a thin impermeable layer. And as a result, we get these ponds up on the top. And here is another one. And in these conditions, the rainwater, which is slightly acidic, of course, permeates through the sand and leaches out the basic alkaline minerals and salts, and leaves behind acid conditions. And one of the animals that you see that likes these acid ponds is the palmate newt, and this is a palmate newt with its unspotty throat that was found in one of those sandy heath ponds. Another animal that appears in the sandy conditions on the heath and is rather special, and it creates these purses. It's a spider that spins a web and creates a purse web with a section about the size of my little finger sticking above the ground, and then a tube going down into the sandy earth, about 20-25 centimeters down into the earth. And this spider is Atopus affinis, and it's a mygalomorph spider, which is a member of the tarantula family. And it's Britain's only member of the tarantula family. And this occurs in a few places in and around London. I've never actually seen it on the heath. This purse web is on the heath, so we know the spiders are there, but I've never actually seen it because they sit down in the bottom of their tube and come up and bite through the tube if a prey item brushes against this sock at the top. And they're different to most spiders in Britain. Instead of their jaws biting opposed like this, they bite in a downward motion like this through the web and immobilize the prey and then take it down into their purse web. So that's a special animal of the heath. We also get it on Blackheath, which is similar sandy conditions, and also Oxshott Heath, which on the Surrey border, which is where I took these photographs of this particular individual. So going back to the geology, we've got London clay at the bottom. We've got claygate beds in the middle. The claygate beds are quite thin, only about 10 meters thick or so at the thickest point, whereas the London clay is about 130 meters thick, up to 130 meters thick. And it's made up of very, very, very fine particles. The London clay is mainly made up of particles which are 0.002 millimeters in size, so it's highly impermeable. You get a few shells and a few other things in beds within the London clay, but generally speaking, it's a thick grey to brown impermeable layer. We get the claygate beds, which are made up of more sand and silt, and with bigger size of particles. And then we get the bagshot sand on the top, which is made up of sand pebbles, which are, let's say, 2 millimeters around about, but also pebbles as well. This layer on the top runs about 18-20 meters in thickness. It's not, of course, totally flat like this. It bends around the hill a little, and it creates areas of the heath which are more sloping. They slope quite steeply down, and then the heath flattens out when you get into the clay areas lower down. And what we get is a line of springs occurring at the junction of the Bagshot Sand, Claygate Beds, and London Clay. And here's one of those springs that's down from Kenwood House. And this is at the junction of the Bagshot Sand above and the Claygate Beds below. So we get springs which feed the ponds and feed the ponds going down. We also get large spring areas like the Sphagnum Bog, which is at the bottom of the Bagshot Sand, and quite a special area with lots of special mosses. We also get these features on the heath here. We've got a spring on the Bagshot Claygate boundary, and you see here the iron oxide coloring of the water. These springs were used in days gone by when there was a spa at Hampstead, and people would come to drink the metallic water from the springs. This is the wellhead of the old Hampstead Spa, which was actually moved from its original location and now sits in Well Walk, I think it is, and doesn't have any water anymore. But this fountain was installed in 1929, named after Mr. Goodison, who was one of the prime movers of taking the heath into public ownership back in 1871. And again, you've got this iron-rich water coming from the fountain. In fact, the source of this water must be quite high up the hill, because this is actually down below the Bagshot Sand level, whereas this one here is at the Bagshot Claygate boundary. Here's another spring. This one is at the junction of the Claygate Beds and the London Clay. And we'll have a look at the effects that this has on the vegetation. So here we've got an area where it's basically a damp area, but these areas here are yellow meadow ant hills, and they create little islands, little raised islands, which are made up of dry soil. The ants, of course, can't live in wet conditions. And on the top of these ant hills, we see this red plant here, which is sheep's sorrel, Rumex acetosella, which creates this nice, interesting mixed area where it's dry and wet at the same time. And here on the introductory photograph that was shown right at the beginning, this is the boundary of the Claygate and a London Clay. And here you can see a clear line, which is the boundary of the relatively dry and acidic Claygate beds and the relatively wet and alkaline London Clay. And so the sheep's sorrel stops growing in the wet conditions. Sheep's sorrel is a hardy little plant, has a very deep taproot, and it's actually toxic and unpalatable to stock. So in years gone by, when there was grazing on the heath, this plant would have been ignored by sheep or whatever were grazing there. So we got that clear clear line, and you can see these all over the heath. This photograph shows the newly recreated Branch Hill Pond over by West Heath. This pond was opened up again in 2022, last year, and it marks the source of the River Westbourne. And we visited this site with the London Geodiversity Partnership a few weeks ago, and traced the path of the River Westbourne as it goes down to West Hampstead. This pond is here because it's a spring-fed pond, and the slope that we're on here is a slope of bagshot sand. So it drains down into this pond and then crosses the road here at Branch Hill and goes off down to towards Finchley Road. And this area here is quite steep going down. Doesn't show terribly well in the photograph. And that is because this area was quarried in the past. And this painting here by John Constable from the beginning of the 19th century shows Branch Hill Pond as it was, with quarrying works in the foreground. So that's a nice little bit of habitat recreation that was done last year. Here's another river source. This is one of the several places that are sources for the River Fleet, flowing down through the Hampstead ponds. And these wet conditions create a habitat for this creature, the grass snake. This is a photograph that I took on a LNHS field trip more than 10 years ago, where we saw a couple of grass snakes. The grass snake population on Hampstead Heath was topped up in the 1980s with a reintroduction program. And we don't know, I don't believe at this stage, whether the population is stable or rising or falling. I found a note to say that although slowworm and common lizard have been found on the heath in the past, that there were none found in a study carried out in 2008, 2009. Here's another couple of trees that are on the spring line, the Claygate London Clay spring line, and we've got two willows next to each other. We've got a goat willow here in the foreground, growing, spreading, and a crack willow in the background there, and they make quite a nice pair within the soggy clay area down towards Hampstead Heath Station. The Claygate beds were heavily exploited in the 19th century for brickworks, and these are the brick works here showing near the viaduct. The viaduct was intended to be a major route going up to Sandy Heath, which was going to be developed for housing, but that plan was refused, and so the viaduct stands as it is here. And this brick field today is the area that's sometimes known as a football field. That was the brick field in years gone by. And if we go to along the track a little bit from there, we come to the pepper pot, and these are bricks from the pepper pot showing the kind of quality bricks that would be used from that local brick field. And these bricks were mixed with claygate and mixed in with other materials to make them suitable for brick making. So the woodlands, the SSSI woodlands, are described as over mature, which means that there's a lot of quite old trees there with interesting features and a lot of dead wood habitat, which of course is excellent for wildlife. These are on the Bagshot Sands, and the SSSI consists of Kenwood and Northwood. This area would have been traditionally in the past managed as coppice with a few standard trees, so it wouldn't be heavily wooded as it is today. And the interesting thing here is that the oak trees, many of the oak trees in this area are sessile oaks rather than pedunculate oaks. So sessile oaks, Quercus petrea. And I hadn't noticed these until lockdown, when I started looking more closely at trees and realized that a lot of the old trees in the Hampstead Heath woods are in fact sessile oaks. So why is that? Well, we go back to the photograph that I showed you earlier, and these two trees here that remain are clearly growing in sandy conditions. And these two trees are estimated now to be of the order of 300 years old. And sessile oaks like these acid, sandy, rocky kind of conditions. So these are those two trees today, or this year. And these two trees are in the ancient tree inventory, which you can go and look at online, and there's the identification numbers of these two trees. These are sessile oaks, and these are uncommon in London, generally. Most oaks that we find are pedunculate oaks, or English oaks as we call them. But these are Quercus petrea, and petrea comes from the meaning of the rocks. So they like rocky, sandy, sparse, light soils. And if we look at some of the maps of some of the oaks that we used to use in the past, you see that many of the old trees are boundary trees. They would not have been growing in a closed canopy forest, high forest. They would have been growing in open conditions and marked boundaries or tracks. So that's the kind of map we had to deal with back in 1987 when we were looking. But today we've got much better ways of working our way around the trees. And the ancient tree inventory, which is run by the Woodland Trust, is just such a thing. And here's a screen grab from the ancient tree inventory showing some of the ancient and veteran and notable trees that are on the heath. And you can use this on your smartphone to navigate around and find your way around. So these are these two are the trees, the trees on Two Tree Hill that we were just looking at. And you can see, you can look up the species and when it was last examined and so on these. And it's great fun to wander around the heath looking at these old trees. So they're are a couple of big sessile oaks that would have been either marking a track or marking a boundary in the past. And these trees are above 6 meters in girth when measured at breast height. And if we look at the Alios Farjon is the man who is the expert on ancient oaks in Britain. He says that if these trees are 6 meters plus and grown in open conditions, you can pretty well guarantee that they're going to be pre-1600. There's another sessile oak growing in a more open condition today, and they're a different shape to the pedunculate oak. They grow much more upright rather than spreading in the way that the classic English oak does. And there are a couple of oaks. The one on the left here is a sessile oak, and the one with the rounded top and spreading growth form is a pedunculate oak. Of course, with oaks, we get the oak processionary moth problem that we have today. And as a person who's interested in entomology, I was a little bit dismayed to see the notice for this work said that it's not harmful. It only kills non-vertebrates. But I guess that's the best way of treating these. The problem is that it kills a lot of other stuff at the same time. So we move on from oaks. I should have mentioned when I was talking about oaks that oaks are not the most competitive of trees. They don't grow well in closed canopy woodland. They don't reproduce well in closed canopy woodland. But this tree, the beech, one example here, purple beech, is a much more competitive tree. And they compete by growing quickly upwards rather than spreading in the way that oaks do. And also they affect the soil around them with their heavy leaf fall, which restricts the growth of other plants underneath it. So here's another one, a highly competitive tree. This purple oak shows the line where the purple variety was grafted on to a base of a regular Fagus sylvaticum. And this tree, probably a lot of people who know Hampstead Heath know this tree. This is the hollow beech up near the top of the heath, near the top of the woodlands. Another tree that's growing right next to that hollow beech is a wild service tree, which I found by using the ancient tree inventory. And this is a double tree here. And wild service trees are generally regarded as being indicators of ancient woodland, so pre-1600 woodland. Interestingly, as our climate is warming, this is affecting the way that wild service trees can reproduce, and the warmer summers are leading to more viable seed. So wild service tree could become more common in the future. There are several on the heath, several growing in the extension, but this is the most impressive one that I have found. We move on to another tree. This is hornbeam, and this is one of several hornbeam that are growing quite low down on the heath. The reason being that hornbeam, which is a magnificent tree when it's growing like this, is a tree that likes clay and doesn't grow on the light soils higher up on the heath. And it, in fact, becomes the dominant tree in many London areas where there is heavy clay. And in fact, most of the ancient woodlands, the large ancient woodlands in London, such as Ruislip woods, have big stands of hornbeam. Oxley's wood is another clay wood which has a preponderance of hornbeam. And in Edward Milner's book on trees, he informs us that it was in the past used for making billiard cues and dominoes. It's a very hard wood, and it can be coppiced, and it has the highest calorific value of any British tree. So it's very valuable for firewood. So you can follow the veteran tree trail. This is a veteran tree trail that's on the Hampstead Heath website, through from the bandstand oak on Golders Hill Park, all the way through to over to the Highgate side of the heath. And it's great fun, great way to spend a winter day tramping around the heath, tracing the trees. Highly recommended. This is an area on the extension which has been used this year and previously in 2019 for sheep grazing trials. It's a small area that was fenced off, and these mounds here are yellow meadow ant hills that are being re-exposed by the grazing. This photograph was taken at the end of the grazing. I didn't get to see the sheep when they were there. They were only there for a week or so. It's yellow meadow ants need to be able to get sunshine onto their ant hills. And so the vegetation behind, as you see, that was smothering these areas has been taken away by the sheep grazing. Good to see. I hope it continues. Now we're going to move on to Hounslow Heath and have a look at some of the features here and discover why it is the way it is. So the River Crane flows from the north, from the Yedding Brook, all the way down to the Thames. And in fact, there is another river called the Duke of Northumberland's River that flows in here, joins the Crane, and this is feeding from the River Colne. And this was created by the Duke of Northumberland, and in fact, another branch leaves here and goes down to Isleworth. So this Crane Valley is quite important. There are a number of nature reserves all the way down the Crane Valley, and it's a dark corridor. So we get glowworms in Donkey Wood here, and probably other places down the heath, down the Crane as well. So going back to the detailed map of the heath, as you can see, it's very flat, as we've said before. There's a floodplain here, which when the Crane floods over, and several wetland nature reserves here. The London Loop passes through on its way up to Hatton Cross, and you can see marked on the map here along the 25-meter contour, you can see an embankment shown. And I'd overseen this embankment and hadn't fully understood why it was here. And we found out about that this year. So looking at the map of Hounslow Heath and its relation to the area around it, Hounslow Heath is connected mainly via the River Crane, um, running down here. Now the River Crane actually rises as the Yedding Brook up in Harrow, runs through Hillingdon, and then comes into Hounslow, and then goes on through Richmond. And then joins the Thames, the tidal Thames, and the lower section of the Crane is in fact tidal. We have the Roman road running through here, crossing the Crane at Beaver Bridge. This goes on down to Staines and then down to Salisbury. So it was a major road in Roman times. The Crane is joined here by the Duke of Northumberland's river, which is a man-made river that was created to feed water from the River Colne. So it goes all the way from the Colne Valley and joins the Crane, and then goes down and then leaves the Crane later on to go towards Sion House. So that's the Duke of Northumberland's river. So what we've got here is a corridor of lots of interconnected nature reserves and wetland nature reserves and others running down. And it's a dark corridor, so we get glowworm and donkey wood here, and we get water vole down the lower sections of the Crane too. So it's quite a rich area and feeds into Hounslow Heath. So this is the Crane Valley Partnership map, and as you see, it's quite an extensive area running right up to the north of London in Harrow. The detailed map shows the River Crane, the main River Crane, and various mill streams that were constructed to feed the various mills that used to run down the river. The London Loop runs through Hounslow Heath and takes us up to Hatton Cross. And there is this curious embankment here showing on the map, which I'll come back to in a little while. So Hounslow Heath was part of the London's Heathland Heritage Project that was run by the GLA about 10 years ago, which focused on several heathland areas around London, and put up these rather nice interpretation boards. To go back to why the heath is flat, we have to look at the geology and the history. So this is a slide from a book called Essex Rock, which was published a couple of years ago. And it shows the climate over the last 5 million years. And what you can see is gradual cooling of the climate, but a lot of ups and downs on the way. And so we are currently sitting in an ice age. The ice age started 2.6 million years ago. And what we have is a series of glacial and interglacial stages going on during that period. Some periods it's very cold, some periods it's an interglacial where it's much warmer. And we talked before about the Anglian Ice Age. That was the coldest event that happened 450,000 years ago, which resulted in the Thames being diverted from its northerly path, north of Hampstead and Highgate, to its current position. So there's the big picture for the last 5 million years. And this is the picture since the Anglian glaciation here 450,000 years ago. So here it was very cold. The ice sheet came down to North London. The Thames was diverted south by that ice sheet. And we've had 4 glacial stages, 1, 2, 3, 4, since then, with the last one ending only 12,000 years ago, 11,800 years ago. What that resulted in the warming and cooling of glacial and interglacial periods was a series of terraces were formed as a result of the ice melting and freezing again. And what that resulted in is an outflow of gravels from the head of the glaciers, forming terraces going down to our current modern river, River Thames. So the terrace that affects Hounslow Heath, and indeed most of Hounslow and the whole Heathrow area, is the Taplow Terrace here, which positioning here around about 150,000 years ago. And then that was followed by the warm period when the Trafalgar Square deposits were laid down, where we find bones of hippopotamus, rhinoceros, and so on. And strangely, no humans around at that time. So if we look at Taplow Terrace gravel, this is what it looks like. It's a whole mishmash of different sizes of gravels, different types of rock that have been picked up by glaciers and then flown down the resulting rivers. So it's not sorted, it's all sorts of odd shapes and sizes, and it's a real mixture. And many of the terraces are similar. This is an area of Taplow Terrace exposed at Hounslow Heath, and here we've got some Calluna heather and some Erica cinerea bell heather growing straight out of this sandy, gravelly mixture. This dry, sandy, gravelly mixture. But if we go back to the map that we looked at earlier, and we showed an embankment, this is a photograph. It doesn't photograph terribly well, but this is a ditch down here and an embankment up here, up the top. And this runs all the way around what is now the Adventure Park part of what used to be Hounslow Heath and the golf course. And we didn't know what created this particular embankment and how it was put together. It's obviously man-made. We have to understand it. We have to go back to the 17th century, and this is a painting of the Siege of Buda, so modern-day Budapest. This is the siege of the Holy Catholic Army put together by the Pope and several other European countries to expel the Ottomans from Buda. And to expel them from Buda, they had to mount a successful siege of Buda in 1686. This was actually the second siege. There was another one a few years earlier that failed, and so there was a garrison of about 7,000 Turkish fighting men that held off the combined army of about up to 10,000, 100,000 rather men of the Holy Alliance. They eventually surrendered, and half of them were massacred, and the rest were sold into slavery or held to ransom. So this was 1686, and we find the story of the in 1687, where King James II, who was a Catholic king, recreated the siege of Buda on Hounslow Heath. And here are some of the illustrations of what happened there. First of all, he had a huge ditch dug out and a mound made that imitated the hill of Buda Castle. And he created a huge spectacle and expected to impress all of the court, and invited people from all over England to witness the recreation with cannon and horses and so on, as you see here. It was a huge affair and went on for quite a period of time. However, this was the site of the King's Quarters, the site of the King's Quarters as they are today. As you can see, it's a scrapyard and recycling centre, and it didn't do James II much good because he was deposed in 1688. So here is another historical map of Hounslow Heath as it was. And you can see here, running through here, it talks about Hounslow Heath, an enormous stretch of land. And in fact, it goes from Bushy Park and Hampton Court and the River Thames at one end, and goes to the little village of Heath Row over here in the north. And this was the site of the first triangulation mapping of England, which was done by William Roy. And he created a baseline, which was the baseline upon which the modern map would be created. And that was about 5 miles long. And he did this by extending a series of glass rods, which were the most reliable way of measuring the terrain. But Hounslow Heath, of course, was chosen because it was largely flat and largely uninhabited because it's poor land. And that was finished in 1787 and 1789 rather, and led to the creation of the Ordnance Survey in 1791. So another piece of history of the Heath. Here, this is a huge granite block which commemorates the fact that Hounslow Heath was an airfield between 1910 and 1920. And that's the modern nature reserve. And there we have marked on there where the airfield stood. And that Hounslow airfield was the center of the hub of military and civil airfields across Britain. And that was, we still have Heathrow nearby, so Hounslow Heath is blessed with quite a lot of aircraft noise. It's not so bad actually when they're coming into land, but when they're taking off over the heath, when the wind is in the east, then it really creates an awful lot of noise. So let's have a look at the heath and what it looks like today. As you can see, it's a mixture of different vegetation types. We've got heather, we've got broom, we've got gorse, and we've got various trees and grassland. This is the main heather pen, which is fenced, but open to the public. And it's fenced in order that it can be grazed, which is very important for keeping the vegetation down. So here's another picture of the main heather pen. And here we've got gorse, which has to be controlled because it's highly invasive. And we've also got oak, which is another invasive plant that has to be controlled in this area. As I mentioned earlier, oak doesn't grow well in closed canopy forest, but it does grow very well. In fact, it's a weed on the heathland because saplings grow up very, very quickly. So here, another view of the heath, and this is a springtime view of the heath, springtime, summertime view of the heath. And this area is grazed periodically. And here we go, it's winter grazing. So Highland cattle were very effective. They're very tough, and they tend to eat just about anything. Oak, of course, is mildly toxic for cattle, so they don't tackle that. And gorse is pretty good at protecting itself. There's some more cattle, different breed in 2020. This is winter grazing, and you see the effect that they have on the grassland areas. And here are the latest brood of 6 Sussex Reds that we have grazing on the heath at this moment in November 2023, and they'll be there through till Christmas. This area here was replanted with heather, with Kaluna brash, to recreate the heathland vegetation. And the cattle here are doing a good job of opening that up and reducing the rough grassland. The grassland is very good for a number of reptiles. There's a common lizard that are quite numerous on the heath, sitting on a cowpat by the looks of things. It's my photograph from a few years ago. They're rarely seen, but the population is quite extensive. And we also have what is regarded as the best place in Britain to see adders. There's a big population of adders, and many of them are melanics, as you can see here. There's a high proportion of melanics. I think the proportion was estimated to be about 25 to 30% melanic. Melanic adders, being dark, are suited to northern climes as they warm up more quickly in the sunshine. And we have a large population of slowworm. Here's a big one. And here are another group that have been sheltering under a mat. One of the features of the heath is there are regularly fires. Much of the heath is grassland, and the grass gets very dry in the summer, and a lot of fires occur. Many of them are malicious and deliberately laid by the local intelligentsia. And good feature is that they tend to be grass fires, and they tend to burn through very quickly. and they don't affect the woodlands. The fire brigade come in and flatten everything in their paths, of course, in their haste to extinguish the fires. But we've had fires going back as long as I've been visiting the heath, and they do tend to look pretty awful when they begin, and obviously they affect things like adders, lizards, slow extensively, which are nesting in the case of adders, are nesting in rabbit burrows in the soil. And here you see, this was an old picture of the heather pen, and the fencing is destroyed, which is expensive to replace. We got gorse here, so this saves us as conservation volunteers from having to cut down the gorse, but it is pretty devastating when it burns through. Gorse, of course, burns very, very quickly, very hot. So the fires tend to be very destructive in the gorse areas. But several of the heathland plants recover very quickly after the fire. Here we've got new shoots of heather coluna coming through, and sheep sorrel. The deep taproot of sheep sorrel regenerates quickly, and heather has a very persistent seed that can exist in adverse conditions. So here's another plant that comes through after the fire. This is Goldilocks moss, fire fire moss, Funaria hygrometrica. It looks terrific when it's carpeting the burned areas. Here's another plant that came through after one of the recent fires and carpeted a huge area, so we had an enormous display of fumitory, common fumitory. And similarly, this area was heavily burned, and the following year we had a fantastic display of bird's foot trefoil carpeting a huge area. This is an area where gorse was, and as you can see, the gorse has died here, but the grass has come back. Gorse seeds are fire resistant, so the gorse springs back as seedlings, and but the gorse is a highly oily plant, so burns very fast, which is why it was used in past years for burning heretics and witches. Here are a couple of oaks growing in the open. This area was right where that photograph of the fire was taken at the beginning, but they don't get damaged very much. They are very resistant, and the fire tends to stop when it hits the woodland. And here is an oak that I've been tracking since 2005. This picture taken on the left, it's been burned at least 5 times in my experience, and there it is this year after last year's extensive fires, and it's lost quite a bit of its green here, so it's damaged, but it's still living on. These birches don't do so well in the fires, and these are now largely dead. This is photograph taken immediately post-fire. We get 3 heath heather species on the heath. We saw the common Coluna ling before, and that is mixed in the dry areas with bell heather, Erica cinerea, and we also get a little bit of cross-leaved heath, but this is generally a heather of wetter areas, so it doesn't tend to do so well on the heath. But we do get some lovely little plants coming through. A couple of my favorites here, Sandspurry on the left, Spergularia, and Bird's Foot on the right. These both are tiny little plants, so require the areas to be very low level of vegetation, but they're beautiful little plants. We get cudweed and small cudweed. Growing cudweed is increasingly rare, and small cudweed is very restricted in its distribution, but they both like the warm, dry, sandy soils of the heath. You can do a tree walk of the heath. There are two apps that you can use on your phone. One's called Tree Talk, which covers many boroughs in London. This one that I'm using here is the same, uses the same mapping of trees, but it's called Hounslow Green Talk. And you can go in and touch a tree and see what species it is, and you can search for any particular species. Here I've got marked one of the two sessile oaks on Hounslow Heath. The rest of the oaks are all pedunculate. The woodland on Hounslow Heath is secondary woodland, as is much of Hampstead Heath too. But we do get these nice oak mixed woodlands and some nice trees. These can't be of any great age. There are no ancient trees on Hounslow Heath, but they're nice trees all the same. Many of the trees grow with this peculiar, many of the oak trees grow with this peculiar epicormic growth, where I think as a result of stress, you get dormant buds emerging and creating these epicormic form of oak tree growth. And here's another oak growing in woodland and displaying the same epicormic pattern. I don't fully understand this, but as I say, I think it's as a result of stress of some type, and maybe fire at some stage causes the dormant buds to emerge. I think that's my last oak tree. We did get this rather strange fungus found by Andy Overall earlier this year, the conic false morel, Verticonica, and this was growing underneath the extensive hawthorn scrub that is on the heath. This construction here is bee banks. These were put in about 20 years ago, and how they were constructed is that this trench was dug out of the gravelly soil and piled up into a bank. So we get a bank and ditch here, and this creates a southerly exposed face, which is ideal for the many mining bees, solitary mining bees that occur on the heath. These banks have got to be kept clear, of course, because as they're open, they are quickly colonized by scrub plants and lose their attractiveness for the bees that want a dry, south-facing slope. And here are some bee banks here. There's the trench running down here, and you can see broom, oak, gorse, bramble taking over. And these aren't fenced, so they can't be grazed. So we have to remove the scrub by hand. Here are some of the bees that are, one of the bees that nests in this area is the ivy bee, which arrived on Hounslow Heath a few years ago. And here it is not on ivy. In fact, this is a male feeding on Canadian goldenrod, which flowers before the ivy. And this is one of the first bees that emerged a couple of years ago. And when they nest in huge nesting aggregations, and their tunnels are deep, and so they bring out quite a lot of spoil and change the nature of the areas quite extensively. And they do tend to nest in huge numbers together. This is another bit of habitat creation that's been practiced over the area. This is an area where the topsoil, the rank topsoil, has been removed to expose the gravel underneath. And then the gravel is left to be colonized by the plants that like that kind of habitat. So here's a scrape in 2012 down by the railway line. This is the ancestral Taplow gravel surface, and this is scattered with a few heather plants, dead heather plants, and springs forth into new heathland areas. And they're really nice for things like cladonia lichens, as you can see here, reindeer moss, and other cladonias on the gravelly surface. And there's an area of that has become more mature. This is quite recent, with lots of heather coming through. And as you see, the scrub birch here, and gorse and broom arriving. And this has to be removed by hand by the conservation volunteers. I'm going to end up with a couple of inhabitants of the heath areas. These are a couple of jumping spiders. Ivarka here with its characteristic face, and Eliores with its extraordinary V-shaped pattern on its cephalothorax behind the eyes there. And these are heathland specialist spiders that like dry, gravelly conditions that we have at the heath. Here's another one of the specialities of the heath, the emperor moth. I've never actually seen the adult moth, but we regularly get the larvae. This one was just about to pupate in that heather scrape that I showed you earlier on, and obviously has been feeding on the heather. But this one here on the left was feeding on bramble, which is another food plant of the emperor moth. I've used these references when I've been talking today. The geology of London I showed you earlier on. Essex Rock has this brilliant description of the Ice Age in the Thames Basin. The ancient oaks information from Alios Farjan of Kew. The ancient tree inventory is the map of trees that you can follow on your smartphone. This is the Camp on Hounslow Heath, written by Ed Harris, who's the chairman of the local historical society that describes the life of the short reign of King James II. And this is Edward Milner, one of our spider experts, our spider recorder, his book on trees that was published a few years ago. You can find my photos in Flickr. This is a macro sky taken a little while ago on the Heath. And you can see hundreds and perhaps even thousands of photographs of Hampstead Heath and Hounslow Heath there. So with that, I wish you well.